Ace Atkins is a good friend of our program, and we like him as a person too. He's one of the top 5 folks we can
I
deal
was going to
with.
say there are not many people we like as people, so
So
you got
he's on
that
the
going
short
for you,
list.
boss.
And
Much
so Ace
appreciated.
writes the Spencer novels ongoingly for Mr. Parker and the estate, Robert B. Parker's books. That began in 1973, and Ace is still doing them as if Bob were in his soul, kind of encouraging him on. Great, great work. Then his own series about a dude named Quinn Coulson, whom many of you read, The Forsaken, is available on in bookstores or libraries or online. There's one right there. And no, you can't borrow my copy. Go buy one.
Go buy one. 'Cause
Ace has a family to feed.
Yeah, he needs the money.
So, how are you, first of all? Good to see
I'm
you.
good. Good. Good.
What-
Always good to see you guys.
What are you up to? Just kind of hanging out?
Working on a new Quinn Coulson book, and Zeke and I got to have lunch the other day and hang out a little bit in Oxford, Mississippi, and enjoying life and,
Yes.
and getting close to getting back to normal after being out on the road.
Yeah, you were even gone as late as last month on The Forsaken,
Yeah,
weren't
and
you?
I go back out. I do a 4-city tour again at the end of this month, so I'll be out on the West Coast.
On
and
this
East
book
Coast.
again?
On this one
Haven't they
again.
heard about this yet? Are they not paying attention out there in the real world?
Hey, you got to just hit them over the head if you can. So we're actually going on a beer and bourbon tour. Do you like that? 4 cities.
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
What's the concept? What's the premise behind
I think
it?
you just get people drunk and then they buy books.
Beautiful.
It is
I-
beautiful.
Why not? I say do that as long as you can pull it off. The new Spencer book you say is nearing completion for next spring.
It is. It's done. It's in the kind of in the editing shoot right now, and very excited about
Is
that.
it titled?
It is. It's called Kickback.
Okay.
Kickback.
All right.
Be out in May. Same time as always. Spencer will return.
So this is on kind of a schedule. Spencer, then we wait a few months and we do Quinn.
That's it. That's
And
it.
that's how you write. So you write
Yeah,
one
not
of
wait a
these, you
few
take a
months.
break, you
Yeah, it's
clear
not
your head.
And not really. It's like Spencer, and the next day I'm doing Quinn. So I'm doing the Boston accent, and then I'm doing North Mississippi right after that.
So they're
So
quite similar.
yeah, very simple.
And then
Same
you-
kind of people actually.
And you also have time, though, to do what you began to do early on as a writer, and that is an investigative piece on something that this is just hard to believe. It's in the new Outside magazine, the November issue, on newsstands now, or online. It is called Secret Agent Man, the spy who scammed us, question mark. Jamie Smith is his name. He says he was recruited into the CIA as an undergrad at Ole Miss. He was 21 years old, in fact. He co-founded Blackwater, according to him, and has done intelligence work all over the world, operating out of a boot camp in the woods of North Mississippi. Plenty of people believed him, the Air Force among them, which gave him $7 million to train personnel. He had a book deal, and he wrote a book. How much of it is true? Dun, dun, dun. How did you get onto this, for starters?
Well, we were talking about during the break, how many great stories come out of people that are in law enforcement or military, and I'm fortunate in writing the Quinn books, kind of getting out to meet these guys, and occasionally they let me go shoot guns with them and go train, and they were doing some training in Oxford, and I was hanging out with some guys who were former Marines and some cops, and there's actually a guy that was a state cop in Pennsylvania, and they started talking about doing training and working for this company called SCG that was up in Holly Springs, Mississippi. And they essentially had been stiffed by this company. The company owed them money. They had done a lot of work. One guy had flown in from Pennsylvania. Another guy lived in Tennessee. And they were just really trying to figure out who they had been working for. Who was this guy that had recruited them to come in and help do this training? They were training not only Air Force personnel, but they were also training a lot of gun nut wannabes, guys that wanted to be paramilitary guys that wanted to get deployed overseas to do contracting work. So they put a lot of long hours in this.
G.I. Joe Fantasy Camp.
It was G.I. Joe Fantasy Camp. Now, there were a lot of really good people that were working for this company, and those guys, the good guys that I got to know, wanted to know how this thing started. Who is this guy, Jamie Smith? And what they knew about him was that he represented himself as a former CIA officer, and not just a guy who had done some computer work, but a field operative.
Right, who had done things of a covert black ops nature.
Correct.
For the country. And so this came up in discussion. They either had not laid eyes on this cat ever. So did you and your partner here begin to just sniff around, or was it already a question mark as to who is this guy and is he for real and legit?
Well, they did know him. He'd come in and he'd occasionally do training, and he would do pep talks to people that wanted to be the trainees to do contracting work. He would start telling stories about adventures he had been on when he had been
Shot in Pakistan.
and which actually was true. That was one of the few things
Okay.
we could actually verify happened, but it wasn't in the way that he would say it. And even some of these guys that were part of the training, one of them said he would occasionally show up in the stories. So Jamie would start telling a story about being, in Pakistan, and this guy was, on Overwatch with him a rifle, and the guy that he was talking about was standing right there saying, "I was never there. I don't know what's happening." And then about this time, the company started kind of falling apart. Guys
Checks
weren't getting
bouncing
paid.
and stuff.
Checks
Yeah,
bouncing.
and we
things-
mentioned these are not guys that you probably want to bounce a check to.
No, not at all. There's one guy.
I
There's
thought-
one guy I got to know real well as a former Marine recon leader. He was actually a drill sergeant on Paris Island.
Sir, yes, sir. That's really all you need
Yeah,
to say to him.
this is not a guy I would want mad at me whatsoever. Very, very impressive people. Very, very, hurt because they not only wanted to get paid, but they really felt like they were doing something. They were working for a company. But at the time, they started questioning the financials and what's happening. Why aren't my checks, cashing? Who is this guy? The news broke that he was involved in a major lawsuit in federal court in Virginia, where a couple said that he had taken $12.5 million from them, that he was
Craig and
supposed-
Mary Jo Sanford.
Craig and Mary Jo, who I've gotten to know very well. And so he had just been up there, and he was found that the judgment was against him. He owed this couple over $10 million in a fraud judgment.
Now, he had $2 million left of what he had siphoned off of them at that time.
Well, I couldn't really figure out why the jury didn't quite go for the whole $12.5 million,
Yeah.
but they went for over $10 million. That basically he misrepresented himself, and a jury was decided that they had been defrauded out of this money, out of over $10 million, $12.5 million. They entrusted him with their life savings. And it's a weird thing when you think about it. You think, why would you'd probably have a hard time giving somebody $20.
Oh,
Remember,
you're
it's
dumb.
$20 or
Yeah.
$12.5 million. But I think that Craig and Mary Jo looked at this guy as a financial guru. They looked at him as somebody who was going to protect their assets. They thought this was their nest egg. This is something. This is not a wealthy couple. This is a couple that made $12.5 million working in a medical or starting a medical waste disposal company. So, I mean, they really worked this thing from the ground up. They sold it to a competitor. They had all this money, and they were trying to protect it. And in comes Jamie Smith, and he says he's going to take this money. He's going to make a 10% return on their investment, and they never saw the money again.
Ace Atkins is our guest. This new story is an Outside magazine. This sounds like the work of that guy, Kevin Trudeau, who scams people on TV and in books and then goes to jail for 10 years and gets out.
Yeah, but it
and does
all
it
is in
again.
his wife's name, so
Right.
you can't touch his dough.
This fellow, who I assume you have not met,
No, I have. We talked to him on the phone. We interviewed
he
him.
must be one of the most persuasive people. Why isn't he running for the presidency of this country?
Does he know the jig is up now?
He's extremely charismatic. I mean, his other job is he's an ordained minister, and I've
No,
seen
me
him
too.
actually giving sermons and talking about.
Well, you
his
said
faith
here
and-
at one point that he peppers his salesmanship with Jesus and all that, which kind of convinces some people that he is perhaps legit, and so his entire approach. He's a military badass. He loves the baby Jesus, and he's all these things in one.
And a
it's-
financial guru.
And so he sucks in all these people. At what point in this process did you and he speak? After the court said you owe them money and you're a scam artist, or at what point?
Well, I'd worked with actually a former colleague of mine before I started writing novels. I worked at the Tampa Tribune.
Right.
And when I started getting into Jamie's story and the involvement and the amount of money that he was accused of taking, and also the government contracts, there was a tremendous amount of investigative reporting to be done. So I reached out to an old buddy of mine, a guy named Michael Fechter, that when I worked for the Tampa Tribune, I was a crime reporter. I used to cover the the cops in courts. Mike was the great investigative reporter at the Tampa Tribune. He was probably the best reporter I've ever worked with. And like many people that are in journalism these days, you got to find other jobs because the papers are folding. I mean,
Yeah.
I worked for this great old paper back in the 1990s. Was fantastic. Now it looks like a leaflet. It's just there's nothing left to it. So I called Mike and I said, hey, do you want in on this? Do you want to get back and do it? It was like getting the band back together.
Right.
I said, let's do this thing, and he was intrigued, and we started working together. And so after we had done a sizable amount of reporting on Jamie's claims of being Harvard educated, and at one point he had been identified as a Navy SEAL. He said that he was not only a CIA officer, which is really the greatest cover that any person can have as
Right.
far as a front, because you can't confirm or deny it. Somebody says,
Right.
well, it's you tell me that you were a Navy SEAL, or you say that you were an Army Ranger, something like that, I could check you out. But if you're CIA, you can say, well, of course, they're not going to say
You
who I
can't
am,
call and
'cause I
say,
was-
is he really one of y'all?
Well, you
Exactly.
can't cram that into a lifetime, let alone be his age right now and be able to claim all of that is true.
Well, we asked him that. I said, look, you said that you were a decorated CIA officer at 21 years old.
Plucked from Ole Miss
But
to
here's the
be-
problem: not out of Ole Miss, while at Ole Miss.
Yes,
He's
yes,
saying he's a
yes.
sophomore.
Yeah.
I mean, these kids that are sophomores at Ole Miss, I mean, they barely can navigate driving around the square,
Right.
or try to figure out, And here, and I said, how were you a CIA officer?
Well, I was pledging Kappa Sig, and
Yeah.
this guy in line I shook
That
hands
boy,
with
he's a
said,
badass.
man, you know
Well,
what,
he
you're a
said
badass.
his
Join the
answer to
CIA.
that was, he said, we've got brave men, men fighting out there that are 18 years old. What's the difference for me working for the CIA? Well, here's the problem, what I told him. And I told him this when we talked on the phone. I said, look, I have people that place you here at Ole Miss during the Gulf War. So you said you're out being a decorated veteran of the Gulf War, which is a big part of his entire,
Rap.
his entire history and his entire persona, but he was a decorated CIA veteran. I talked to his buddies. They said he was eating pizza in a dorm room at Ole Miss and watching CNN and watching that. So you can't be two places at once.
And speaking of CNN, this guy ended up being on a bunch of different news
One of them
networks
experts.
as
Listen,
one of
by,
those experts.
watch or beware. I mean, what you guys talk about all the time. I mean, this guy was on, I think we counted 25 times on Fox News, on CNN, on CNBC. He was talking about being an expert on terrorism, on matters of international importance. This is, people are not vetted. Their backgrounds are not checked. And a buddy of his from Ole Miss actually saw him talking on Fox News, being introduced as a former CIA officer, and he played golf with Shepard Smith's brother, and he said, you need to check this guy out. This guy, I know who this guy is,
Trouble.
and he's not who he says he is, and he never appeared on Fox News ever again.
Ace Atkins is here. What was his answer when you said, when the Gulf War was happening, you were at Ole Miss watching TV? How did he respond to being busted right straight up?
He had an answer for everything. I think in that case, when we were talking about his involvement during that Gulf War, he just stuck to it. He said, we didn't know what we were talking about. He said that he was going to class at Ole Miss, but at the same time, he was able to do his work for the CIA. But the timeline just did not jive. I mean, he completed Ole Miss in in 4 years. He did get out with a political science degree, but he said, he later on, he said he's Harvard educated, that he'd gone to Harvard and all this stuff. Is not true.
Well, this I highlighted this one sentence, which I think says all of this. This story is long and detailed and captivating, and we encourage you to read it. It's in this magazine or on our website. Jamie's always lived his life in a comic book, says one friend.
Yeah.
He's one of these dudes that convinced himself of all of this stuff and then lived it.
Yeah.
And convinced everybody else for a long time. He's 44 years old now.
Right.
I guess the question here at the end is, what's he doing now, and what does the future hold? I mean, is he possibly going to be on the hook for more crimes, for more theft, for more?
Well, here's the thing: is he, after he had the fraud judgment against him in federal court, he was ordered to pay this couple back $10.5 million, which he later, said he has no money, he has no assets, he doesn't have a car, he can't pay any of this money back. So they're not going to see any of this stuff. So, what do you do after that? After you're found out
Disappear?
You disappear. No, you write a book. Is what
Ah,
you do.
that's right. I forgot about that.
So, this is not one of these self-published deals. I mean, this was something.
William Morrow, right?
William Morrow. It's an
Yeah.
imprint of HarperCollins.
Right.
This was one of the top 5 publishers in the country. They gave him an advance, what I would estimate conservatively was probably at least a 6-figure advance to write this book about his memoirs.
Which was when?
This was probably a year ago. The book was supposed to come out in May.
Gray.
Gray work.
Gray,
We were
yeah.
supposed to, we were going to actually publish this story in May, and they said, well, can you wait? Wait till you read the book. This will explain everything. Okay. We waited. HarperCollins would not give us a copy of the book. They would not answer many of our questions. The book was supposed to come out on September 9th, part of the big September 11th, of course, so,
Right.
a remembrance to have this book coming out at that time. Of course, the book, what happens? It's pulled a few weeks before publication. So we're pretty sure HarperCollins is hip to who this guy is now. But the amazing thing about it is if you're going to sign a guy to write his memoirs, talking about being a hero and his overseas work and that kind of stuff,
Vet.
wouldn't you Google him? I'm not talking.
Yeah.
We did some fair amount of investigative work.
Yeah,
I mean,
you
we
did.
talked to everyone. The people he had conned, the Sanfords, all the way back to his high school buddies at
Yeah.
South Panola. Probably many of your listeners may. You might even know him.
Yeah.
He's from Batesville. And they said,
Panola
look,
County.
they said one of the comments I've heard a lot since this story is published, which you can get on. It's actually online right now. Is they said, look, this guy may have fooled people up north. This guy may have fooled government agencies. He may have done all this kind of stuff, but he never fooled anybody in Batesville. Everyone always knew who he was.
You don't fool with Batesville.
You
now.
don't
No,
mess
sir.
with Batesville.
No,
They said
no, just
everyone
catch
in Panola County knew exactly who this guy was.
So the future is, let's say gray for this guy, because the book has been delayed twice, you said.
Yeah.
And will likely not come out unless it does under some
Yeah, it's
suspicious.
been completely pulled from
Canned.
the HarperCollins website. It's been pulled from Amazon. They will not answer any of our questions. We've had repeated attempts to talk to HarperCollins about how they had decided to publish this book, what kind of fact-checking process this book had actually gone through.
Not a good one.
And we also gave Jamie and his lawyer numerous attempts to respond to exactly what we were saying. We actually gave it a complete rundown of every point that was going to be made in the story, and he had adequate time and again to respond to all of these things. And he
How
decided
long
not
did
to.
you and Mike work on this from start to finish?
Geez, we worked on it almost a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost a year. I mean, on and off. I mean, of course, between writing books and, Mike has another job as well, and we just kind of picked at this thing, and new things would come up, and we'd be introduced to new people who'd known Jamie, and then, really the interesting thing was getting to find out more about what he was doing in high school and college. I think that was the thing
Yeah.
that was most telling about him. What he
Eating
was up to.
pizza is what you
Yeah, and then
learned.
he later, he was in the CIA, and but at the same time, he was supposedly doing all this work overseas and this kind of stuff. We have him. He opened up a Christian karate school in Virginia, and then
Christian karate.
Christian
mostly
Karate shop
Ks.
for Jesus.
Yeah.
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 Oh, my Lord.
KRIS.
I think the one thing that you guys really would appreciate, knowing your sense of humor, knowing what you guys like, there's a video of Jamie that you can find online. If not, I'll send you a link to it, where he is actually in a mega church in Virginia, and he's rappelling from the rafters while they're playing Stars and Stripes Forever.
No.
And he lands in the mega church, and they introduce him as a Navy SEAL, and he salutes the congregation as part of a big 4th of July celebration. So if that doesn't kind of put the whole image in a nutshell, I don't think anything
So
else.
if karma doesn't get this guy, what will? What's going to get him locked
And
up?
has he gone off the grid before you
He's
answer
pretty
that
much
question?
off the grid. I mean, we
If you're listening, hey Jamie, how you doing?
Yeah, he may be out there listening.
Hey, bro.
I don't know.
scam.
I just don't know. We're talking about the things that you guys talk about a lot, which is the day and age of instant fame. These days, everybody wants to be a talking
Star.
head. They
Yeah.
want to be a star. They want to get the Twitter account. In the cycle of 24-hour news, they'll put guys on this like this on Fox News, and to be able to talk about counterterrorism and matters of national importance without ever checking their background.
Yeah.
So once you get on that track, and once you are introduced on television, once you are interviewed in a newspaper, and you say this is who you are,
You're
that's who you
legitimate.
become. And of
Exactly.
course, he had a movie in the works. At one
Yeah.
time, he was developing a reality show. It was all that kind of stuff. It's that just add water celebrity. You say that who you are enough times, and you get that website going, and you represent yourself in a certain way, people don't question you. And that's the thing that I think what you guys relay to your audience all the time is,
Sniff it
suspect
out.
everybody.
Yeah.
And use common sense as you were talking.
Yeah, he's no Marcus Luttrell, and he, I think, maybe perhaps he was inspired by that whole thing, because that's a pretty badass image to have, if you can pull it off, and if it's the truth. But you know that at some point you're going to get busted.
Well,
He's 44 years old. He milked this for 20-something years.
Well, I think what it really was post 9/11 is what gave boom to a lot of these guys. And you had a few things going on. I mean, the military contracts, especially as we were dialing back the
Yeah.
war, as
Yeah.
things were going down, they're writing checks left and right. I mean, the
Yeah.
Air Force gave him $7.5 million, our taxpayer dollars, to pay this guy to train Air Force personnel deploying overseas. They're drawing troops back so far, they've got to put boots on the ground and get people over there. And so people like this in the contracting business were making a ton of money. And not only that, there's so much flag waving. Everybody wants to be a part of this thing. Everyone wants to be a hero. And it was such chaotic times post 9/11. This is just the
Open
perfect
arms.
time.
Yeah.
Open arms.
Yeah, as I mentioned to you, in the new book by Mr. Baldacci, which is called The Escape, which comes out next month, there's a chapter in there where he discusses that there are 18 agencies that we know of in this country who do intelligence. There are, besides those official ones, 1 million people from coast to coast that work in various agencies that are not really recognized. There are 1 million people in various spots doing intelligence work. How many of those people
Yeah.
are not qualified and have convinced somebody? And you mentioned that you know other guys who have maintained that they're SEALs when they're in fact a guy from Kroger or
Right.
something.
Right. Well, you think about it, is everybody, especially in the way the world has been in the last few years. You meet a guy at a bar, you see some guy that he introduces himself as a former special ops guy or a Navy SEAL or whatever. You want to shake his hand and buy him a beer. You
Sure.
want to say thank you for
Yeah.
protecting our country, and you want to,
Or you want
and
to
that's-
kick his ass if he's lying.
Yeah, and that's what I was we were talking about earlier. There's a guy in Florida, former Navy SEAL, and he is retired, and he spends his days these days refuting SEAL claims. And so he says he does 25 to 30 phony Navy SEALs a day. And that's what he does. He just
How does
outs
he
these
find
guys.
them? Just
People will turn them in. People will put it on their resume. They're getting a job, and they put on there that they were a Navy SEAL and they've done all these operations.
My
But
gosh.
it's this day and age. There's always been people who have claimed phony military records.
Right.
And that was the other thing that Jamie
It's
did.
the lowest of the low.
Well,
man.
Jamie claimed and told us that he had actually served 7 years in the Mississippi National Guard, and that was a big part of his, his training, his military training. I know a lot of great guys who have served in the Guard, spent a lot of time in Iraq, Afghanistan. A good buddy of mine, Chris Smith, actually did 2 tours over there. I really respect everything these guys have done.
Right.
Jamie never was deployed with the National Guard. He never really actually did any Guard training. He was part of an ROTC program at Ole Miss when he was there, and he quit before he was ever able to finish out his contract. So he never even was able to follow through with what he had committed to, which was going through the ROTC program and then later getting part of the Guard. He actually was voluntarily disenrolled for willful neglect to train. I think that's exactly how it was phrased.
He was too busy working with the CIA.
Well, I mean, how are you going to do it?
Just in the time we've been doing this interview, we got an email from somebody that says, I'm a listener to your program, and I know Jamie Smith. He defaulted on a historic house purchase in Holly Springs, my house. I've met him and had to deal with him exclusively, and he is a piece. Let me know if you'd like to discuss further.
Well, it sounds like that person probably owned a place called Crump Place, which was actually the place where Boss Crump of Memphis fame grew up. That was his house. And it's a beautiful piece of property there in Holly Springs. It's big. It's an antebellum mansion. It's got a historic marker in front of it. And that's where Jamie ran his operations for a long time.
Unbelievable.
So, again, he had the training compound in Holly Springs. It was about 50 acres. And this is where the other point that's in the story that you'll learn about is people would come from all over the country, pay $1,500 for a few days, check into the little roadside motel there on Highway 78, and go do military training. And it wasn't just shooting guns and going there. They pretended that they were in a foreign country. which Marshall County maybe
It's
arguable, maybe it's a little, but they
well,
would
some of those
pretend
areas between Holly Springs and Oxford, you gotta wonder.
Yeah, you do have to wonder. But they would
Tillamook
go
County, like, you know,
they're
yeah.
very Tillamook County-esque, and but they would do military operations, and they would have to go and get intel at some. At McDonald's and meet somebody at McDonald's, and one of the meetings for intelligence was they had to go to the Pizza Hut, and one of the missions was to find out what kind of stove was at the Pizza Hut, and so they had to do an
Oh,
interview
my
with the
God.
Pizza Hut manager. So they're running spy games and shooting guns and all this stuff, and people are pulling them over and pretending they're working for this foreign country called the Drock and all this, and this is all going on in Holly Springs,
Man.
And
This is like going to one of those cowboy fantasy camps.
Yeah.
It's
Or the
this
baseball
was spy.
fantasy
This was
camp.
this
Yeah.
was spy fantasy camp, and they I think they made a decent amount of money. There's a lot of, I mean, go to your local Kroger or whatever and look at the rack of magazines with gun enthusiasts.
Oh, God,
I mean,
yeah.
there's like 100 magazines
Yes,
that are out right now.
yes.
So everybody loves to do this kind of stuff.
Incredible story and great work as always from our friend Ace Atkins. The Outside magazine is on newsstands now or online. The Spy Who Scammed Us is in the bottom right-hand corner. Scammed us? ? The answer I would say is yes. An incredible tale, which you're really good at. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure, guys.
For covering this. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the spring, if not before. A new Spencer book, a new Quinn Colson to follow that. In the meantime, how are those Auburn Tigers working out for you?
They're gonna make a comeback.
Okay.
It was a little brief upset, but we'll see.
All right.
We'll see.
There's a half a season left.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
They're coming to
football
Oxford
left.
soon. That's all I have to say.
All right, sir. Ace Atkins, thank you very much.
Thanks,
we'll talk
guys.
to you again soon. Our friend Bruce Van Weingarten waiting in the green room. The new flyer is out on newsstands.
Hey, thanks, guys.